She's Sarah Kendzior, everybody, and great to have you on board again. Thank you for. How did the book tour go?
Oh, it was great. It was a lot of fun.
You came to Los Angeles, and I was away because I would have totally jumped on board. I was looking forward to meeting you, but I happened to be back in Washington D.C. at the time. You
Mm.
know, you've done so much great reporting on Trump and and I did want to get to the first book, Hiding in Plain Sight. I think Hiding in Plain Sight is one of those books where you can pretty much needle drop it, like you can just crack it open and there's some good stuff on any page. And here I'm going to give you an example. I just did this morning. I thought, oh, Sarah's coming on. I'm going to. So here is what just a paragraph from Hiding in Plain Sight, which is her last book, Sarah's last book. I first heard about The Apprentice from my mother, who nearly 2 decades after our tasteless christening of Trump Tower was coming around to the guy. Sarah, you need to come back home, she told me in winter of 2004. You're missing too much TV. Donald Trump has a show where he pretends to be a businessman and he is so obnoxious. He's like, you're fired. I love it. He's terrible. The contestants are all trying to impress him. At first, I was like, I can't believe this asshole has his own show, but it's perfect. This is exactly at his level. This is what he should have been doing all this time. They've got him contained. And then you go on. For Americans like my mom, who had spent the 1980s and early 1990s gleefully loathing Donald Trump, The Apprentice was a hate-watch nostalgia trip. Here was everything amusing about the Donald with none of the danger. I love that you just dip in. This is what you do a lot with your own personal experience and family conversations or experiences. But what I think is so interesting about that is obviously that is where the lie about Donald Trump, the reshaped vision of Donald Trump took place with The Apprentice.
Yeah, absolutely. And happy Mother's Day to my mom for having that passage be the one read. Yeah, I mean, just to give a little bit of context to the book, I wrote this book in 2019. It came out in 2020. And one thing I had mentioned is that as a child, I knew a lot about Donald Trump, and I mean, as a literal child, like 8, 9 years old, because my mom had a subscription to Spy magazine and also to Vanity Fair. And they did a lot of exposés about Trump's corruption, his financial crimes, his refusal to pay taxes, all the stuff that people pretend to know now. And so, I grew up thinking of him as a white collar criminal. And so when I was out of the country, The Apprentice debuted. And that's the conversation that my mom and I had on the phone where she was trying to explain this to me. The Apprentice was created by Mark Burnett. And Mark Burnett's first reality show attempt was actually one about Vladimir Putin. That is what he wanted to do before Trump. And then he wasn't able to do that. And he had help, in that initiative from another of Trump's PR guys who went on to work for his campaign. And so, yeah, The Apprentice was meant to wipe the minds clean of Americans who could remember the 1980s, 1990s, and kind of recast them in a new mold. And I don't think it was as effective in people who grew up in kind of the tri-state area where they might have read New York tabloids and stuff like that. But I remember during the 2016 campaign when I was covering it here in St. Louis, and I was interviewing Trump supporters about why they liked him. The Apprentice was one of the main reasons. They genuinely thought he was a very successful businessman. They had no idea about all of the bankruptcies, all the financial crimes, the ties to the mafia. They kept thinking if those were important, then the media would have told us. And I was like, well, they did. When I was a child, when I was a teenager, they talked about it a lot. But now they're not bringing it up at all. Isn't that strange? So yeah, it served its purpose very well.
Well, it served its purpose, and you are so right about the fact that the image of Donald Trump was reconstituted in this way, and it wasn't done in a. It didn't seem that the goal was any kind of political one. It was a television one. It was to show those shots of him slow motion walking from the Trump helicopter and to establish his bona fides as a businessman, and so that he could then hold court over these game show contestants who are all trying. But that was what it was, and it was done so well. My friend actually was the NBC executive who bought The Apprentice, and he said, I didn't buy it for Donald Trump. I thought Donald Trump was a joke. He said, I bought it for Mark Burnett. I knew Mark Burnett would make it great. And he did make it great in the sense that he successfully changed our vision of Donald Trump, and it became, it's the, what is it, the fruit of the poison tree that we are,
Yes.
and it really is what we're dealing with. But what you also talked about in that, but so that was The Apprentice, and I like that because, as we say, that became the launching pad, I think, to sort of again reimagining who this guy is and what how great he could be. But what you talk about in the book also, and I guess this is your last book, Hiding in Plain Sight, is you talk about all the ways in which this guy is clearly corrupt and has been corrupt. You did a lot of research and explanation and laying out the ways in which, in real estate, he could do everything from just outright cheating in some ways that high-end real estate people do to money laundering. I know you talk about that in the book. I wonder if you could just spend a moment talking about the corruption that was already part of the Trump world prior to even becoming president.
Yeah, I mean, Trump was immersed in corruption from the moment that he entered public life as a dual protege of his father, Fred Trump, who had his own corruption scandals. But of course, as Roy Cohn's mentee, Roy Cohn is one of the most corrupt figures in American history, and I think one of the most influential of the latter 20th century. He was the lawyer for Joe McCarthy, for multiple mafia families, for Nixon, for Reagan. He was a political advisor to the GOP, and he was able also to successfully manipulate the media and manipulate the courts. And those are the areas in which Trump has thrived. And so he taught Trump a lot of tools of the trade in terms of propaganda, in terms of things like it doesn't matter, what the case is, it matters what the judge is. I'm misquoting him slightly, but that was basically his frame of mind, that it doesn't matter what you do, it matters who you know. And so he made sure that Trump knew everyone, from mafia goons to actual powerful businessmen, people, corporate raiders like Carl Icahn, to politicians, to entertainment figures. Trump was never an outsider. That was one of the most ridiculous things about the 2016 campaign, was the way that he tried to portray himself as some sort of neophyte outsider when he had actually run for president before. Almost ran in '88, in '96, ran in 2000, ran in 2012. He had once said that he would not run for president unless he felt he would be appointed, unless he felt that he was guaranteed a win. And so that's very interesting that he went on to run again finally in 2016. But yeah, you can look at Trump Tower, which was basically a dorm for the Russian mafia. You could look at his ties to the Italian American mafia before that. And I should note that, there was a big change in organized crime in the 80s and 90s, where the Italian mafia was cracked down upon by people like Trump's close friend and later his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, only for them to make way for mafiosos from the former Soviet Union, who are often referred to as the Russian mafia, but are really a transnational mafia. They operate in countries all over the world. They have multiple passports. They have nowadays digital currency. They really kind of redefine the idea of borders, and they are much more vicious, much more lethal than the Italian American mafia ever was. And so that was Trump's world. It was a world in which he could always go free, in which he was considered above the law. The DOJ first started investigating him in 1973. I think the question of why he was never held accountable in a meaningful way, a way which might prevent him from running for office, for example, or contain him in some form, is a huge question of our times. And it's one that really isn't addressed in a very serious way.
Well, it's interesting that there were these inflection moments. We all witnessed the highest profile one during his presidency when he was impeached, and after J6, when those impeachment proceedings seemed to, have all the veracity of video. Like, you could see right there what was going on, and we could hear his remarks, we could see his remarks, we could see his tweets and all the rest. It seemed so clear, the linkage between the call to violence and the violence that was perpetrated that day. And yet there it was, probably the last chance to restrain him and to prevent his ascendance to the presidency again, and it was passed.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify something, I wrote Hiding in Plain Sight in 2020, and I wrote my newest book, The Last American Road Trip, in 2025. In between them, there's a book called They Knew, which goes right to the heart of what you're saying right now about the fact that the government and U.S. officials and all of these people in various, three-letter agencies absolutely knew about all of Trump's ties to organized crime. They knew about his sedition plots, in part because he and his cohort would post them on the internet. I knew about January 6th. Like, I knew that it was coming, to the point that I had a January 6th Capitol attack preview special on a podcast that I was hosting on January 5th, because they were doing things like making hotel reservations and asking for tips. And that was because Trump told them, he told his acolytes that it was just fine to storm the Capitol, that it was in fact their patriotic duty. So you have to ask, why wasn't this stopped in advance? And then you have to ask, given that after January 6th, the vast majority of the country, including the majority of Republican voters and Trump supporters, thought that the attack on the Capitol was wrong, thought that Trump should be held accountable, this gave a tremendous opening to finally put all of this to rest. And then I think to dig into the broader network of criminality that surrounds Trump, because that's really the issue. Is it's not about one man, it's about a network. The Democrats just refused to do this. They had a very brief impeachment hearing, despite the abundance of evidence in the public domain. Said they wanted to go on vacation for Valentine's Day, put Merrick Garland in charge. Merrick Garland, whose own mentor was a woman named Jamie Garaley, who is Jared Kushner's ethics lawyer. Like, that is the primary influence on Merrick Garland's life, was Jared Kushner's ethics lawyer. So if Garland were to actually pursue a rigorous investigation into Trump, he would very likely also be pursuing an investigation into the DOJ, at which he once worked himself, and into potentially his own mentor. And I think that they knew that. And I think Trump was very pleased with that pick, in part because he said so. He was very happy about the appointment of Merrick Garland, and people thought he was being sarcastic, but he wasn't. But yeah, they really blew it. Like, that time period, the very beginning of 2021, was a brief moment where the whole country, I think, was seeing things clearly. They saw Trump for what he was, and they wanted a stop to it. They wanted things to, be transparent, be accountable to the people, and to just slow down. And instead, they slowed so much that they came to an absolute halt. And as a result, Trump was able to declare candidacy again in 2023, be declared a felon, and have that have no relevance to his ability to run for office. And now we're at the disaster that we're in right now as a result of that.
Well, I'm so glad that you talk about the complicity of the Democrats in this, and that's a deliberate complicity in your view, Sarah. It's not a kind of an accidental complicity.
Oh, it's absolutely deliberate. I don't think it's all the Democrats, but I definitely think it's the top ones. It's people like Nancy Pelosi, who, in addition to refusing to impeach or not wanting to impeach the second time after the Capitol attacks, really didn't want to impeach the first time, even though the Mueller report was handed to her and others in Congress just on a silver platter with all of these obstruction of justice charges laid out. Instead, they waited and waited until they found a case that involved Joe Biden, which I think in retrospect is extremely strange. There's so many other things that Trump had done, things that had much greater relevance to the current moment, like abusing the pardon power or abuse of migrants. I mean, that's certainly relevant to what's happening now. Instead, they had this kind of arcane case involving Ukraine and Biden that set this up as this kind of dynamic where you have Trump, Russia versus Biden, Ukraine. And I think it really confused a lot of folks about what the conflict was about and about this kind of, duality. But yeah, I think that they have intentionally blown it. Schumer is somebody who was in the Trump, Roy Cohn, New York City circle for a long time. You'll notice that most of the complicit Democrats seem to be coming out of New York or out of California, where they get a lot of Silicon Valley donations. I think that in terms of the latter manifestations of Trump criminality, it's very important to look at partners like Elon Musk and at all of this Silicon Valley money that's been going into people's campaigns. I think there are other Democrats who genuinely opposed this, but they were, shouted down, and they didn't do enough themselves, I think, to kind of stand up to individuals like Pelosi. An interesting thing about a gerontocracy, and you certainly saw this at the end of the Soviet Union, is one of the reasons that they exist is to protect state secrets. You have a lot of very, very old people who've been in office for decades, sometimes even half a century, and they know, kind of the worst of what the U.S. government has done. They know a lot of dirt, and I think that dirt can operate as leverage, and that's how we ended up with this kind of makeup of Congress. Trump, of course, has all that as well as a result of him being the president, and also as a result of his entire life in these, kind of high elite circles.
Well, he traffics a lot in that dirt too. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a sense that his leverage is something that he's always seeking one way or another. And it's funny. They knew shows up on my Kindle every time I am there, and yet I am embarrassed, Sarah. I have yet to read it, so I
It's on
apologize.
sale as a Kindle book right now at $2.99, very limited time. So
Okay, I will grab it, and we'll have links to all of your stuff underneath this video. But I don't think it was hurt by the fact that I haven't read it yet, because I think it's a bestseller. Anyway, I was mentioning though what we've seen in Trump, and boy, you see it in spades right now as president. Is he traffics in this kind of leverage. He's always looking for that leverage that really allows a kind of self-enrichment that we're seeing now, I would say, on a scale that's completely unprecedented in the history of America.
Yes, what we're seeing is awful. It makes his first term seem mild. And, one of the things I've been saying, especially after Trump took office and had access to, classified documents and so forth, is that Trump has more leverage over the US government than they have over him. And that seems to actually predate his arrival in office, but it certainly was solidified by having that kind of access to intelligence information. And now, his aim, which I have always said, is to strip this country down and sell it for parts, is out in the open, and it's gruesome. It's horrible to witness in terms of human suffering and in terms of threats to things like our national parks, our national lands, our environment, our clean water, our public health. All of that is threatened with no regard for humanity. At the same time, you see this push, from the people surrounding him for AI, for ChatGPT, for all these replacements of human beings, which just points to a general culture of disposability. They don't care if we live or die. They don't care if this country is depopulated. They're only interested in resource mining and theft. And there are no courts that will constrain them, because one of the first things that Trump's cohort did was to lock down the Supreme Court. In 2018, you saw a lot of interesting resignations and appointments during that time. And with that kind of power, it becomes very difficult to contain him. And I just wish that there was more people in office spelling this out directly, and not just kind of tweeting about it as if it's some new kind of thing he's doing, but really getting into the fact that this has been a long-term plan. He's backed by a lot of different people, ranging from, the Heritage Foundation, right-wing types, to foreign oligarchs, to all sorts of people involved in organized crime. And now, we're at a point where you can't undo a lot of this. You can't just vote out the mafia. You can't just move along from that. It leaves a permanent scar. And I hope, I've been hoping for a decade that they would wake up and realize the depth of this threat. But Biden's term certainly stripped away that illusion for me, because they had every opportunity in the world to do that, including public support, and yet they refused to do so.
I just want to double back then to this last point. The reason, in your judgment, that nothing was done more aggressively during the Biden administration, when there was the leverage at least seemed to be tipping a little bit toward Democrats, who were at least in control of the executive branch, the reason is you feel that there were enough political characters who had a vested interest in leaving it alone that Trump could just get a pass for 4 years during the Biden administration. And just last thing before it's certainly true that Mueller slow-walked everything. It seemed that was on full display, and only really began putting together charges and an investigation after there was a congressional hearing that laid bare everything with J6.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mueller slow-walked everything. Garland made Mueller look like a speed champion. I mean, it was all purposely dragged out. They also discouraged the public from having critical inquiry. They used the same tactics as QAnon. It was this constant mantra of just trust the plan. People are working behind the scenes. A savior is going to come. The result is that this country became very passive and very kind of pliant, and that opened the door, I think, for the kind of shock and awe of the new Trump administration, because people were not preparing themselves for 4 years of authoritarianism. They were constantly reassured by pundits and politicians that everything was going to be just fine. The Biden administration needed to act with urgency on day one. They needed to treat this as an imminent and ongoing threat, and hold Trump and his general cohort accountable as soon as possible, and also hold the agencies that allowed him to rise to power and that have their own records of corruption accountable. And that is what I think they did not want to do. They did not want to dig into the FBI, the DOJ, the Treasury, all of these agencies that have records of corruption independent of Trump, that often involve Democratic presidents as well. This is definitely a bipartisan phenomenon, and they're very reluctant to address it as that.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I misspoke. I meant to Garland. Thank you very much for that. It's I've been up all night with my dying cat, Sarah. It's been a very it's been so sad.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, it's all right. Again, he's got a few more days left, so it's we're spending time with him. But I just sometimes got brain fog.
Well, they're both very slow, though, so you were correct.
Yeah, that's right. They both were, Mueller and Garland, both slow. It's funny, just because we're on Garland, then I just want to touch on your latest book. Just because we're talking about Garland, I've dumped hour after hour on Garland. I just thought, during the Biden administration and in conversations like this one, as sort of the prime mover in this in allowing this corruption to continue and allowing this authoritarianism to rise again, as the man with enough power potentially to have stopped the bleeding. But my question to you is, was Biden really also quite responsible? Maybe even more responsible for the appointment of Garland, just because we're talking about Garland? Isn't he the guy? I hate to dump, it feels like, he's a pinata these days, Biden, for all the mistakes and for not withdrawing from the race, et cetera. But I thought the Garland appointment was just, it was heinous.
It was a horrible, horrible appointment. And now, of course, it's Biden's fault. And if Biden had any vested interest in the national security and public safety of this country, he would have fired Garland early on if it had been some sort of accident. It was not accidental. It was intentional. Biden is the person who put, who helped get Garland's mentor, Jamie Gorelick, into the Clinton DOJ, after which she was accused of a multitude of corrupt acts, ranging from Oklahoma City cover-ups to 9/11 cover-ups. And then she was involved in, being a lawyer for basically the worst, most deplorable acts of the 21st century. The, oil spills, big pharma, opioid peddling. I'd be here forever. Anyway, Biden absolutely knew what he was doing. We could all see what was happening. We could all see the danger that we were in. And they browbeat anybody who brought this up. Right now it might be fashionable to criticize the Biden administration as not being tough enough on Trump and his cohort. During that time, I think I got more threats from Democrats, and I mean threats of violence, than I got from, the average kind of MAGA voter, even though I wrote a book like Hiding in Plain Sight, and I'm, a very outspoken critic of Trump. People did not want to go there. And I think it's because they do not want criticism of the DOJ. And that is because the DOJ has long served as Trump's protector and his friend, going all the way back to the original 1973 investigation, where they basically let him walk. And from there on in, they let him walk again and again and again. So whatever reasons they had for that, I think must be very dark ones.
If the DOJ is his friend, why the cleaning house of the sort that we've seen? This has been a almost line by line following of the Project 2025 strategy to surround this new executive, Donald Trump, with those who are fierce loyalists. And so they're going agency by agency. Of course, that's leaving Doge out. But in terms of populating the government with loyalists, why worry about it if the DOJ are such good friends of Trump historically?
Yeah, I mean, it's the DOJ is not a monolith, and one of the first things Trump did in 2016 was fire everyone who was looking into the Russian mafia and into that particular transnational mafia that he was tied to. That said, paranoia runs strong in an autocratic personality and in a despotic kind of empire, and I think what he wants is just people who are absolutely tied to him in a very personal connection. He wants his own Gestapo. The issue with the FBI and cleaning it out isn't that he thinks, oh, the FBI is so corrupt. He thinks it's not corrupt enough on his behalf. He thinks they all should be working primarily for his own personal protection and very little else. And so I don't think he trusts anybody at this point that he didn't personally put in there. And this also, I should clarify, I don't think he individually is selecting all of these people or deciding who to fire. I don't think he cares enough about the bureaucracy of the situation, but he's surrounded with a lot of people who at least are associated with organized crime or white collar crime. They definitely don't want anybody investigating those sorts of acts to remain within the DOJ. The people, for example, who might have been involved in indicting Trump's old friends, Paul Manafort or Roger Stone or others like that, because there were a lot of indictments initially in the first Trump term. He then pardoned them all, which is why I thought that they should have concentrated on abuse of the pardon power. The Democrats, I mean, they did not. But yeah, he is the longer he is in office, this is true of any kind of dictator type figure, the more paranoid he's going to get and the more ruthless he's going to get. And he's going to surround himself with only the most loyal of people. And he will continually doubt their loyalty and make them prove it as well.
The crypto world that has now become something that the U.S. government has literal buy-in to. I mean, it was crazy to me when the announcement came that we were going to buy hundreds of millions of dollars of crypto reserve that we'd have. It was both absurd, but if you just pulled back the curtain even a little bit, you could see all the ways in which now this administration, Trump and the family, can enrich themselves on a scale they never could have dreamt of. I'm talking about billions of dollars, and it's happened even in just a few months.
Yeah, this is a very frightening thing. I don't fully understand it. I'll be, playing with you. I don't fully understand crypto. And I think that's true of most Americans. I live in a part of the country where people still pay cash for things. And so I think this also derails a lot of people from doing the kind of investigative inquiry into crypto that we should be doing. We've also seen journalism gutted during this time. We've seen investigative journalism gutted during this time. When I think of journalists who would do a really good job on this, they're all people who've had to go independent because, their outlet either went under or, they fired them. And of course, Trump is there with his, and Musk with their teams of lawyers where they threaten anybody who criticizes them, especially when those individuals follow the money. And it is much more difficult to follow the money when there is a much looser conception of what money is, what wealth is, where does it come from, what is the basis of our currency. I do worry that they're going to replace the dollar with a purely digital kind of currency. Environmentally, this is also catastrophic as well. I just have to add that there's so many things wrong with this place. But yeah, it's very scary stuff.
Well, I mean, and the whole idea of replacing the dollar with some kind of a crypto or some kind of a digital currency is on its face completely undermining the power of the U.S. because the dollar has so much power internationally. Why would you want to do anything that undermines that in the least? And he's already doing things to undermine the power of the dollar, independent of crypto and digital. I mean, and that's all in service of trade deficits, et cetera. By devaluing the dollar, you make American goods cheaper for export, et cetera. So that's that. But again, just to round it out, essentially, the Trump family, in the form of the son, the Trump son, along with the son of the guy who's doing the Russian negotiations, they have this platform. I think it's called Liberty something, and that is like the Charles Schwab or Morgan Stanley of crypto. So you can go there and trade, buy and sell crypto. And then the UAE, they come in and they buy all this crypto and they buy it on their platform, on the Trump platform. And so that just monies the Trump family immediately. They made a ton of money on that because it was 1.2 billion or maybe even north of that. So I saw it as, and again, this is happening in plain sight. And so you know that the UAE isn't just doing this because they all of a sudden have an interest in crypto. They are doing it because they want, it's influence peddling is what's going on. They want leverage with the new administration.
Yeah, and I think your point about this being against the national interest is an essential one, because everything that Trump has done in office, whether in the first or second term, has been against the national interest, has been in the aim of weakening the U.S. And that's because he sees this country very much as, a corporate raider would, that if you weaken it, if you break it, if you sicken it, then you buy it on the cheap, then you break it up and sell it for parts. And you also weaken all the institutions that could have held him accountable or prevented things like these giant billion-dollar illicit deals, which he also was making during his first administration. Things like Kushner's, real estate deals, or his $2 billion deal with the Saudis, and so forth. Now, because there was no accountability the first time around, and he now has much greater control over the courts and other institutions, he can do much bigger schemes. And he has the full backing of people who used to kind of oppose him the first time around. A lot of these, Silicon Valley tycoons, people like Jeff Bezos, for example, who he tried to blackmail, they initially opposed him. Now they are acting as if they fear him. And they're just deciding, well, if I can't beat him, join him. I'm just going to get in on this and enhance my own wealth to the greatest possibility. But yeah, he doesn't have any baseline loyalty to this country or its people. And I think that's true of many of those surrounding him. And I think that's unfortunately true of many in Congress. They won't miss the United States if it's gone. I don't think they feel anything in their heart or soul. They only feel things in their wallet and their bank accounts. And it's grotesque. It's a profound betrayal.
Wow, that's so well said. This reminds me of the conversation I have occasionally with people who, and I used to get this when we on the radio show, when people would call in and they would talk about the environment and all of these threats to the environment, the toxification of the environment, the air, the soil, the water, et cetera. And I would hear, Mark, the planet's going to be fine. The planet's going to be here thousands of years after we're gone. Well, the planet will be here. The rock will be here. I understand that. But the planet is all of these things. It's the richness. It's the biodiversity. It's the clean air. It's the water. That is what the planet is. So don't tell me the planet's going to be here. And so it is with America. Don't tell me, well, America will be here. America is that collection of things that we have done. And that's really what you speak about in your latest book when you talk about your road trip and in all of these different places that you go with your family. There's a piece of American history and our history, beautiful, troubled, and also wondrous in terms of the potential and the values that America has. And if all of those get steamrolled by this guy, then I get it. There's still a flag and there's still a Pledge of Allegiance and crap, but the tenets of America are gone.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always made a distinction as somebody who studies authoritarian regimes between the government and the country, between the government and the people and the things that people value. And what they are trying to destroy are things that people value: our culture, our landmarks, our landscapes, our, national historic institutions, our food. I mean, just everything. It's ironic because Trump, I think, knows that people sense this loss, which is why he'll say things like, oh, we need to save the entertainment industry. We need to make it American again, because people really do feel this deep longing where they want things to feel American made and be proud of their country. But he is the one destroying it. It is his cohort that are selling our country bit by bit to foreign buyers, and then using these kind of platitudes as a cover up, for that objective. But yeah, it would be a profound loss. And I hope that people hold on to what they do love about this country. That doesn't mean lie about it. It doesn't mean whitewash it or deny terrible things that happened in it or have happened in it. But it means, look for what you value in it and know that they are trying to take it, and don't let them. Like, if they're trying to erase the historical records, then document it yourself. Make an effort to build something yourself, because these politicians, these institutions, they are not out to protect you, and they are not out to protect this country. And it's a great shame. And I don't think it's a permanent situation. I think that this could potentially be changed, but for the time being, that's just the way it is right now. And so I think if people are proactive, and kind of assume the worst, they could possibly get, not the best, but they could get something better, and not just sort of sit and wait for it to get better, but, do something themselves, just simply documenting what's going on and documenting what they see as valuable, in this country.
Well, I like that we're wrapping up with sort of an optimistic message. So all is not lost in your view, but there'll be a lot lost before we turn any corner.
They're certainly taking it. They're certainly trying to destroy it. And power is not something that people give you. Power is something you take. And so people need to take this back, and they need to make an effort to protect what we can. And I think there's certain things that everyone treasures, national parks, for example, or just basic things like clean water, clean air. I think we all kind of can support that. So unifying around certain issues might be productive at this time, but just expect the worst from this group of individuals. That's a realistic thing to do. That's just based objectively on their track record. Like, think of the worst thing that they could possibly do. That is very likely the thing that they are planning. And then think, well, how would I protect it? How would I protect myself? How would I protect my community? How would I protect my country? And then, do what you can. There are many, many others that also are in this fight with you.
Last question for you, and maybe we'll revisit this in future conversations, so you feel free to modify your answer. But so much is talked about in relation to the midterms. So much is talked about, like that's the next big chance, is these elections coming up. Tell me whether I can have faith that there will be legitimacy around the election, or whether or not this administration will do everything they can to declare a state of emergency. Martial law, of course, is talked about. All of these different things that could happen to essentially undermine the election completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think our elections will be most likely to be undermined through dark money and through candidates being pushed out through threats, bribes, blackmail, those sorts of tactics. If that doesn't work, then he reverts to violence. That was the story of January 6th. There were a number of court cases and things like that, or threats to poll workers, et cetera. It was only at the very end, when all of that wasn't working, that he tried to attempt a coup. So it really depends whether he feels like he can have this kind of success anyway, whether he goes to those lengths. But my goodness, don't wait for elections to try to better this country and to try to protect yourself, because we can't afford to wait until November 2026. My goodness, the things, just think about what he's done in the last 4 months alone, and then multiply that several times.
I mean, I like that you reference violence, though, because Lisa Murkowski talked about it, and you heard Mitt Romney wrote about it, that there's a palpable sense of fear about physical violence to representatives, people, public officials of all sorts, and their families. This is a new prominent ingredient in the American zeitgeist now.
I don't think it's new, because if you look at, the assassinations of Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X, we have a long history of political assassination and targeting. We also have a history of it coming from our institutions, coming from places like the FBI. But for it to be this pervasive, for it to be the dominant part of our political culture, and for it to come openly from the top, where Trump routinely threatens the physical safety of people. I mean, in the first impeachment hearing, it was part of it was about him putting a hit out on the American ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. Like, this is a very long-term pattern with him, and it goes back to his days with Roy Cohn before he was president, where they were routinely threatening physical harm. They sometimes do it in this sort of mafia, nice family you got there, too bad if something happens, that kind of thing. And now they're just applying it to the whole country. But yeah, the fact that we live in a political culture of blackmail and threats of violence, it is a mafia state. More than any other form of government, more than being a full autocracy, it is a mafia state. And I think that is partly what Congress is struggling with, and partly because they had this delusional belief that like the Constitution and checks and balances somehow protect you from a mafia state. Like elections and the other traditional forms of leverage, they do not work in these circumstances. You know, where it works is strength and honesty and integrity and just determination and not backing down. And that also means having to reveal whatever shady things everybody has done. If you have partnered with the mafia state at various points and you're going to come out looking kind of bad, it is better to just do that and let everybody know for the sake of the country so that we can finally move forward and live up to our ideals in practice, which is, I think, what, you know, the vast majority of Americans would like us to be doing right now instead of this nonsense.
So well said. Again, Sarah Kendzior, her latest is The Last American Road Trip. We'll have links to it. They Knew is the book prior, just to try to get the chronology right. Hiding in Plain Sight before that. The View from Flyover Country. You know, you're prolific, and here it is. All of your different books. So tell me, just on the way out, this isn't a Trump related question, but just a process related question. So because you are so prolific and you've wrapped up this latest book, and this latest book is, as I say, has so many jumping off points and so many moving moments. I was moved by this book, The Last American Road Trip. There's some really tender moments and reflections that you share that I think are super powerful and also relate to America. When do you start the next book is my process question.
Oh my goodness. Never ask that to anyone who just got back from a 1-month 9-city book tour. I need to sleep before thinking that one over. Yeah. I'm just hoping there's still a publishing industry and freedom of speech by the time I write my next book. That's all I have to say on that. So.
Well, you have friends here, so please come visit again. The Last American Road Trip, Sarah Kendzior, links to it underneath this video. Thank you always. Love seeing you and appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Sarah Kendzior, everybody.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.